Thank you. Good.
Awesome.
Now it's recording.
Awesome.
Good. Thank you.
Cool. Yeah. So thanks, Sam, for having me. I've been asking myself since you reached out one question and only one, and that is, how the heck did a high school dropout involved in politics wind up speaking to a classroom at a college full of tech people? And hopefully by the end of this, that question might be answered, but I don't know for sure. But yeah, my name's Arjav Rawal. I used to be the vice chair of the California High School Democrats. I used to leak a ton of polls on Twitter.
Your high school dropout.
I did. I tested out. Yeah.
I'm actually a high school dropout.
Okay. Congratulations.
I never got high school.
That's the right thing to do, I think.
Well, I don't know if it's always the right thing. That's what I did.
But yeah, I used to do a ton of stuff with Democratic Party politics, and now I'm sort of transitioning over to the policy side of things, which I'll talk about in a second. But how I got involved in politics is, I think, a really interesting story. I mean, I didn't get involved because I was bored, and I certainly didn't get involved because I decided that I wanted to ruin my life. I got involved really because of my family. My parents came here as immigrants. My dad in '84, my mom in '87. They both came to get their masters, and so they both settled down, and they worked really hard to get to where they are now. My sister, at the age of 2, was diagnosed with autism, and so the doctors told my parents that she will never be able to speak or walk again. Proud to report that is not true. The doctors were wrong, as you would expect. And then one of the other things that really happened after that was my dad was diagnosed with leukemia in '03. I hadn't even been potty trained at that point, or I was getting pretty close to done. But and so I was sort of always raised with the specter of healthcare looming over my family and me, and there was all sorts of stuff going on, and we got by, and we had to work really hard to get by, but we made it through. And I was always raised with that idea that we need to be cognizant of the privilege that we're given, and we should be giving back. And so in elementary school, I got into the spelling bee kind of as a way to sort of cope with things. And I remember in 5th grade, I was at the regional spelling bee, and I got knocked out, and I tied for 3rd. And tying for 3rd was really heartbreaking for me, just because it was the first year that they sent only the winner, and they only sent they used to send the top 3, so I would have gone if it had just been a year before, which really sucked. And so I went ahead and I firmed up my resolve to try and make my hometown proud, go back to the National Spelling Bee, who knows, maybe make a play for the trophy and bring it home. And so my mom and I sat down, we started studying, we really started looking at all this stuff. And one day we got an email saying, we're very sorry, the San Francisco Chronicle doesn't have the money for a regional spelling bee anymore. We're going to have to shut it down. There will be no San Franciscan at the regional spelling, or at the National Spelling Bee next year. And so my mom and I, we were pretty heartbroken over it for obvious reasons. We'd worked really hard and we didn't want to let it go to waste. And so we did what anyone would do. We called our congressman. And at that point, Eric Swalwell had just gotten elected to his first term. And so they were really excited to help us out. He was only a few months in. And so they worked with us to get it back up. And that was really when I started to become more interested in politics. I started reading a lot about it. And I remember very distinctly, one of my earliest memories is getting really mad at this thing called the filibuster, because the Senate wasn't able to pass gun safety legislation because of it. And so I saw politics for how archaic it is. And, growing up as the son of an engineer, I also was privy to a lot of, my dad constantly being incredibly cynical of the political scene just because of how forward-thinking his world of the industry is. And so I started to get more involved, and I was looking at C-SPAN almost obsessively every single day after I got home. And I remember one day I came home, I turned on C-SPAN, and I started looking at this dude from Texas named Ted Cruz filibustering to try and take away protections from folks with pre-existing conditions. And that really sat with me, and I was incredibly infuriated because my family is a family of pre-existing conditions, right? Mom's diabetic, dad's leukemia, sister's autistic. I have asthma, which is technically a pre-existing condition, even if it's not super severe. And so that's when I really became a pretty progressive Democrat, and I vowed to do whatever I could to elect more Democrats. Next election cycle comes around, 2014, made a lot of phone calls, knocked on a lot of doors, and that was when I really realized that this is what I wanted to do, because there were so many other families in the parts of the state that I knocked on doors in that were going through the same thing, weren't really able to get by just because the same kinds of opportunities my parents had when they came to this country, those were gone. Those weren't around anymore. And so after knocking on a ton of doors, I made a whole lot of phone calls. I've lost count of how many. I became a campaign intern for Eric Swalwell. I did a lot of finance and research stuff. After that, my mayor asked me to take over as the president of a 2-day hackathon and music festival. Everyone had graduated the previous year. There were only 3 other students. We built the team out to 20. We raised $20,000 in a month, which we're pretty proud of. Last summer, I interned for the district office of my assembly member, did a lot of constituent casework and communication intake, lots of policy memos, briefings, that sort of stuff. And then in July of last year, I was asked to be chief of staff for the California High School Democrats. That's the official high school wing of the Democratic Party. I helped put together a pretty ambitious expansion strategy that we're pretty excited about. We're hoping that it will materialize in some more gains down ballot in California in 2020. I became vice chair in November, and then last month I resigned to focus on some other work. But anyways, I'm digressing because I know you called me here for a specific reason.
Well, not necessarily. Actually, this might be good. We have a lot of students. Do they need technical help with any of these campaigns?
Oh, yeah.
That's what I thought.
All sorts of
stuff. We have a
stuff.
whole student internship program. They could send people to our job fair, and it'd be good experience for students. A lot of students are politically motivated, and they'll help them set up websites and online stuff. Yeah,
no, websites are a really big deal. Nation Builder has a lot of openings, I think. And then, of course, digital, mobilization strategies are a really important tool. But
they credited Obama's win to that.
Exactly. And speaking of Obama, part of that win was digital organizing in Iowa. And so that was really where this whole thing began for me, how I got the Iowa poll. I was talking to some friends. It was very innocent. We weren't really looking at, what was going to happen. We just really wanted the poll. There were 2 hours to go, and we just really wanted to see what the poll was going to say because it was the first poll in forever. And so we started looking around, and I realized I started looking on all the other Des Moines Register articles, and I noticed, okay, these infographics, all of these are hosted on a different website. So let's go ahead and look on that website. It's a third-party service. It's kind of like a Canva for journalists. And so I went to Infogram's website, looked at the Des Moines Register account, and I saw that they had posted everything right there in broad daylight the day before for everyone to see. And so I said, okay, well, there's no way someone else hasn't found this already, because that's where the betting side of things really picks up. And so I said, all right, well, if I tell them, they're not going to respond. And that's when I said, all right, time to take to Twitter. Let's get it out there. And then after that, November came around, another Iowa poll. They had already fixed up their infographic website. So I decided, let's try CNN's website. Probably a tougher nut to crack. Oh, how wrong I was. I found the PDF. I leaked it again because I knew that CNN, no chance in hell that they were going to respond. And that one was really funny because their political director, David Chalian, followed me the morning after I leaked it. So I sent him a DM saying, hi, David, thank you for deciding to monitor my content. He never responded, but he did read it, so that sucked. But I expected that now that they knew what was going on, how I had managed to find their poll, I would never be able to leak a poll again. And I was super excited. All right, great. We now have the luxury of suspense. But then came January. This was the first Iowa poll in forever from any pollster. And the morning of, I happened to be really sick, so I decided to stay home sick. And I woke up later that day and I saw that my Twitter had blown up because a lot of people had said, hey, today's the day of the Iowa poll release. You should go follow Arjav on Twitter because he's got, the inside scoop on how this stuff works. And then I DM'd him and I said, hey, thanks for recommending this, but I don't think that I'm going to be able to get it this time. Right? I don't know. I feel like they've probably gotten it together. How wrong I was yet again. I managed to find it through a different tactic. Instead of a PDF file, I found the graphic embed on the article itself. And I found that, and I said, all right, here we go. Third time's the charm. This has got to be the last time I do this. And then I went ahead and leaked it again. And that was when everything blew up for real. I got a New York Times article for myself for whatever reason, San Francisco Chronicle, KPIX did a story, ABC 7, and this talk, right?
Well, I'd like you to understand this is happening.
Yeah.
And you're just deducing from the URLs you could see before, right?
Yeah.
This is common. And by the way, it's also illegal. I did the same thing. I found a bunch of medical data in Louisiana just sitting in the open. And I contacted them and they accused me of being in breach. And I went to my lawyer and he said, well, technically they're correct. And technically,
CFAA is the law, right?
CFAA again. He said, now you could defend yourself.
Yeah.
You're not an idiot, get a lawyer.
Right.
But the fact is, my first thought, this can't be illegal. It was just sitting there.
Yeah.
But that's not the way the CFAA works.
Yeah.
If you asked for it and got it, and they didn't want you to ask for it,
yeah,
you technically.
Yeah.
Well, I was horrified by that, like I think everybody is.
Right. Yeah, and that definitely is concerning. And so I think for me, I've definitely tried to sit on that question a lot of, does this really matter? It is, at the end of the day, just a few PDF files. But the answer is yes.
This is why I used to try to be a complete white hat and never break the law. And then I found out even when you do your best, you're still breaking the law.
Yeah.
And so every business has to accept some legal risk.
Right.
And so you have to decide, what can I get away with and what can my lawyer fix?
Right.
Is probably much more realistic than saying I'm completely legal.
Right. Right.
I have a lawyer if you need one. Because my lawyer could save you from that.
Right. Right.
But it's not as simple as 100% legal. That's almost impossible.
Yeah, no, and there probably was some element of it that did end up eventually violating the law. But at the end of the day, I think we really need to ask ourselves, who's the real idiot here?
Yeah, of course.
Right. And so I'd say CNN.
Of course. And there's also the issue of free speech.
Yeah.
You're releasing information that does have some benefit. That's
right.
It's okay.
Yeah.
You want vulnerabilities.
Right.
Not showing people.
Right.
My lawyer said, as long as there's a good side and a bad side, it's okay.
There you go.
When it's
there you go.
Bad, free speech doesn't cover.
There you go. Yeah. And so, it definitely, it got CNN to clean their stuff up. They don't do this anymore. They schedule their uploads like I told them to.
Well, this is the
right.
5, I think.
Right.
Insular direct object access is a technical term.
Right.
For this.
Right. It got the New York Times to cover up their endorsements. That also happened. And probably my single biggest achievement, the one that I'm the most proud of, is embarrassing the pundit class by calling them a bunch of morons. I'm pretty proud of that. I think that
because they didn't find out.
Exactly. They could have figured this stuff out themselves and they chose not to.
Well, I don't think that's true because it takes the hacker mindset. There's a certain kind of person that tries to dig down into something, and other people don't think that way.
Yeah. Oh, I don't know. I guess not. But yeah, no. I think for me, this really came down to, if it's not going to be me, then who is it going to be? Right? It's probably going to be some foreign operative looking to time the release of their social media bots to blow up at release time so that their preferred candidate can go viral on Twitter, depending on the results, right? And if it's not a poll, then what is it going to be? Like a media tip or a briefing that's supposed to remain under tight reps. So there's a lot of vulnerabilities here. And so these kinds of practices, they matter, they have real world consequences. And so what I did, I guess, was able to help get them fixed. So I'm definitely proud of that fact. And I didn't want to own it for a very long time. I expected that it would be over in a few days, but life and other plans. So here we are, right?
This is what happens if you have something at the right time. It just excites me.
Yeah. And coming here, there was a lot of difficulty for how to frame this thing, how sort of put a framework to it. And so one of my friends, who's an incredible activist in her own right, her name's Chloe Moore, she suggested that I should base it off of kind of this TED talk that was given some years ago by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie called The Danger of a Single Story. And so I thought a lot about how impressionable people can become in the face of something like this. For me, I think people were so impressionable that I was somehow heralded as some hero or legend. It starts to show people as just one thing. In my case, being the poll leaker, when I've done all this I've built this entire body of work. But on top of that, I think there's also an important quality of how single stories can be used to empower people and humanize them. And that's I think the asset of it, right? And I think that's more than true, I think, in the tech world, right? There's a lot of, the single story with tech, I think, is always just, we're constantly churning out more code without really a deeper understanding of what that does. But I've sort of come to terms with this reality that, you know, if we all put our collective single stories to work, we can do small things, but together those small things can become something big, right? And even if the rest of the folks around you don't necessarily meet the mark, at least you can take heart in the fact that you've lived a full life. And that's one where you've made your own small dreams a reality. And so I think about these things often. I come back to the word that knocked me out of the spelling bee in the first place back in 5th grade, which is bruisewort. Bruisewort is a plant that heals bruises. It's no secret to anyone that we do have a whole lot of bruising around this country right now. I think, you know, that really just ties into, you know, one bruisewort alone won't change much, but an entire field of bruiseworts, an entire field of, say, poll leakers or whatever, can repair that kind of damage. That's really what it comes down to. Yeah. I don't think so. Yeah. That's what I was trying to see is, yeah. Oh, there it is. There it is. Yep, I see it. Yeah. No, what do I think of the current Democratic field? I mean, you can see my laptop right here. I was a Elizabeth Warren supporter. Before that, I was a big Jay Inslee fan. And, you know, I was trying to figure out, you know, who out of the remaining two candidates could I support? I already cast my vote, so I'm all set. You know, I voted for Warren in the primary. It was my first time voting, which I was pretty excited about. But, you know, between these two candidates, I've sort of decided I'm going to sit back, look at it for myself, and whoever the nominee is, I'll vote for them, because at least they won't cage children. They won't be suing in the courts to try and take away people's health care. So there's I guess, a lot of things that come out of the Democratic nominee that may not always be perfect, but it's a heck of a lot better than what we've got in the White House right now.
Well, I think Warren's doing the same thing. I think she's angled who's going to give her vice president.
I couldn't tell you what her thinking is. I have no idea, but you know what I mean. I think she's a great senator. She'd be a great vice president. She'd be a great Senate Majority Leader too. I think someone else. Sorry, I think someone needs to mute their.
Oh yeah, let me
yeah.
That's what,
No.
I forgot to do that. I mute everybody here.
Okay.
Otherwise, they irritate each other.
Right. That's
which
okay.
is there. It is mute.
Yeah.
Good. Good.
Got it. Awesome.
Yep.
Cool.
Good. I often forget.
Awesome.
And then they get annoyed. Anyway, so how do people get involved in politics around here? I mean, you're involved, right?
Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of different ways to go about and do it. You can go to, if you're in high school, you can go to hsdems.org/register. Join the High School Democrats of America. They're a great organization. There is College Democrats of America. I don't know what their website is, but you can definitely go check them out. Start your own chapter if you don't have one already. All sorts of great stuff.
But I'm always trying to get students involved in the military, politics, and government to try to keep them on the straight and narrow.
Yeah.
And we've had Air Force recruiters here and stuff.
Right.
And so I think a lot of students are very interested in politics and would like to offer technical help.
Right. And that's something that we could use, especially with the Iowa nightmare that just went down. right? I mean, it was a debacle of sorts that could have been completely avoided if it hadn't been ruined by overdoing the process.
That's why I'm amazed. I mean, why didn't they just get a big company like Microsoft?
They did it last time.
I know some huge company would come in with an enterprise class solution that would work, I would think.
Yeah. I couldn't tell you what the Iowa Democratic Party's thinking was or whether they were thinking at all.
Yeah.
What I can say is if you're really looking for something that costs $0, have a Google form, verify the IP address of the precinct, and that's that. Yeah. Not that hard. So I really don't know what they were thinking by hiring a company like Shadow that has no record of building stuff like it. What they did.
Shadow actually exists to make software for the Democratic Party.
I know.
It's weird.
Yeah, it does exist to make software for the Democratic Party, but the amount of money that they were paid, if you look at all the filings,
60,000.
Yeah, which you never pay that much money for something of this sort. Yeah, I mean, they were way overpaid for the kinds of technology that you need to run a multi-level caucus event like that.
So it sounds like there was something or something.
Yeah. Probably. Well, there were ties between the company and Pete Buttigieg's campaign.
That's right.
Which definitely.
Which is another thing you should avoid.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think at that point the appearance of impropriety was too late because by the time they said we're not going to release results tonight, I think by that point it was kind of a done deal.
Yeah.
But they were going to look improper no matter what.
Well, one thing I've heard is they might just give up caucuses entirely.
That would be nice. Because caucuses are broken. They don't work. They're not accessible to anybody who might have a disability, right? It's much easier to just hold a primary and get it out. If you really want to preserve sort of the viability element of a caucus, then just go ahead and have a ranked choice primary. Not rocket science. I mean, the one reason caucuses work in a state like Iowa is because it's a small state. Can you imagine if California had a caucus? What a dumpster fire that would be. So, I do think that caucuses have got to go. It's a good thing that we've made strides toward that. In the aftermath of 2016, a bunch of states got rid of it. And I really think that now, after what's gone on with the new levels of transparency revealing the incompetence throughout the entire process from start to finish, you're going to start to see a lot more states ditch caucuses and move straight to a primary.
So what do you think is going on in our country? I mean, it seems like Republicans have gone completely insane.
Mm-hmm.
And what's going to come next?
Till coronavirus do us part.
Well, presumably that will only kill 1% of us or something. The rest will carry on. But it looks like the Republican Party may have taken a complete switch to crazy land.
Yeah. I don't know. I at this point, I'm hoping that we can just beat this president, beat his allies in the Senate and the House, and just get them out of here and start doing stuff to make sure that this never happens again, right?
Well, I don't think there's any way to do that.
I think so. I mean, if you start by tackling corruption, right, then you eliminate the sort of inability to move the ball on legislation when it comes to climate or healthcare or guns, all sorts of different stuff, right? You tackle campaign finance reform that removes the sort of the profit motive that comes with entering politics. We do have a question. How can I run for government positions such as Senate? We need diversity and younger blood in our government. Okay. Well, I don't disagree. I do think that we need diversity. I do think that we need younger blood in government. I mean, it really depends on like how you want to go about entering the political ladder, right? You have to start somewhere. Definitely don't go from being mayor of a city of 120,000 straight to the presidency. That would be a bit of a leap, I think. Right. And that's what I got my start with, right? Knocking on doors, making phone calls for a candidate that you believe in. Right. You got to learn what the ropes are. And so I think in that sense, I definitely learned a lot about, when I became an intern, I learned a lot about how the finance side of things works, how terrible fundraising is, and how much of a crashing bore it is really. when it comes to the policy side, I learned a lot about, when I interned for my assembly member, the sort of the ropes of, you know, what kinds of interests want to meet with you and how you have to sort of tread lightly when it comes to dealing with everybody around you in politics. So you basically just gotta, I guess, climb the ladder, so to speak, by starting small and really just building that kind of initial credibility, and eventually, you know, when you get out there, then you can be a credible candidate who's taken seriously. And if you're lucky enough, you know, if you happen to show up on TV often enough, then you can someday become a viable candidate for president without having the relevant experience. That's how it works these days, apparently. Oh, hell no. I've been around long enough to know that running for office is a terrible idea for me. I don't have the temperament for it. I don't have the self-esteem for it. I don't have the fundraising chops for it. Fundraising is a nightmare. I mean, the kinds of things that they make you do in terms of, you know, they basically put you in a dungeon and just make you dial constantly, round the clock. It is one of the most dehumanizing things in the world to have to run for office, because all you have to do really is just sit there and fundraise. And the kinds of people you have to raise money from makes it even more difficult, right? I mean, I don't want to have to raise money by having to go and beg for money from someone who works for ExxonMobil, right? That's just corruption, plain and simple. Because everybody wants something in return, and I don't want to have to be beholden to anybody. So the answer as far as running for office goes is not only no, it is a hell no.
So what's your goal?
What's the goal?
What's your goal? What do you do?
I mean, so after this, you know, I've now tested out of high school. I got my diploma. Yeah. Well, yeah, basically at this point, I graduated early, so to speak. And so now what the plan is to, you know, go to college. Not entirely prepared to say what quite yet, but you'll know in due time what that plan looks like. Yeah. Got another question. Do you think there is a credible risk to national security with the social media influence from other countries on Facebook, Twitter, et cetera? Yes, I do think so. I think that part of the problem with national security right now is that they don't really know how to use social media properly. They don't know what the right channels look like. That again goes back to, who was it that said, Alex's point that we do need more diversity and younger blood in our government, because without younger blood, you won't really have, you've got a bunch of officials right now who aren't really, they don't have a vested interest in building a better future and leaving things behind for someone to build on progress. You have people that really aren't in tune with how things work these days. You know, I mean, case in point, I think the best example was when the CEO of Google went and testified, and Steve King, white nationalist extraordinaire, was complaining about the fact that there are really, I mean, he was complaining about his Apple iPhone rather than dealing with Android and not really understanding the difference between Google or Apple. So that's one thing. Is there ways to fix our broken election system now that we have technology? Yes. The answer is you've got to test the technology to make sure that it gets done right and implemented properly. I think right now the biggest problem is that we aren't testing the technology. Case in point, again, I hate to keep coming back to the Iowa caucuses, but that app wasn't tested at all. There was no vetting process, not only for the company that built the app, but also there was no stress testing of the actual app itself before caucus night. Caucus night was the test, and that I think is wrong. As far as, you know, voting machines, God knows those are outdated. I mean, we do need a paper ballot trail, and so I think the new machines in LA County got it right with having that kind of paper trail, and being able to print the ballot out right after you've filled it. But I think that part of the other big issue is that also ran into a lot of bugs and issues that could have been avoided if everything had been tested properly. So it's just a matter of putting the time and effort in for testing these things rather than, you know, dealing with everything the day of and letting the nightmare unfold. How should large tech companies be held accountable to protect the security of elections? Well, so, I mean, I obviously did support Elizabeth Warren, right? Breaking up big tech is definitely something that I think is a good idea in theory. I think a lot of politicians in general don't necessarily, I think a lot of people in politics don't necessarily understand the implications of breaking up big tech because, and that, I will say that definitely includes the Warren campaign's plan. For example, right, the biggest company on the list that really, the biggest red flag on that list of companies they wanted to break up was Amazon, right? AWS. Well, I mean, Facebook, I didn't think they wanted to break up Facebook. I just think they wanted to rein in terms of privacy laws, but they wanted to break up Amazon. And that really, that really stuck with me for a second because AWS hosts a ton of stuff. So if you're breaking stuff up, right, and you got AWS as its own company, that's still going to be a monopoly on the e-commerce side, right? You're still going to have a lot of issues with things of that sort. So you got to get it right. You sort of have to be a bit more careful in the implementation of it. So I do think that breaking tech companies up is good policy when done right, and I think it's necessary policy.
There's no examples of it being done right.
No.
The one against Microsoft actually did lead to some reform practices.
Yeah. And I think the best way to bring about sort of that reform and to put it on the path of sort of transitioning away from that is to really just start with saying we're going to break things up and then hope that it'll work out in the end. Because that's really how politics works, is you start somewhere and you work your way down.
Well, you know, see, to me, like Bill Gates was proven right on Microsoft. He said, you don't need to break us up because we're running to stay on top of the ball and we will stumble, and they didn't stumble.
Yeah.
So you didn't actually need to break them up. They'll collapse anyway.
Right. But with the current model that we have right now, I think we're seeing a lot of folks sort of hurdle towards not collapse, but eventual, you know, domination of the market. And that's what concerns me.
Well, I'm not sure, because I think what happens is we have this, by the time you grow to a certain size, you can no longer innovate. And somebody else will disrupt.
Right.
But I think it's a jungle and they kill each other.
Maybe it is, but for the time being, I think the best thing to do is to start by saying we'll break them up and then move from there. Because I think right now, ultimately, the only way to really disrupt it, so to speak, is to go for that kind of model.
Well, I guess Bernie will do it if he gets in.
Maybe he will, maybe he won't. We'll see whether he can live through November, right? That's the other thing that really frustrates me about the remaining choices in the field. What do you think about those who try and buy their way into the election? Yeah, Bloomberg, Steyer, you know, both of them tried it. What do I think of Michael Bloomberg? Terrible person, not qualified to be president of the United States, wasn't qualified to be mayor of New York, flawed human being, zero moral character. I'm glad that it didn't work, and I'm glad that someone took him to task for it, Elizabeth Warren. Yeah. What else do we have? Do we have any more questions? I don't think. I think that's just about it. That kind of wraps it up for the time. But yeah, if you guys have any, yeah.
You said earlier about like bringing technology into elections. Do you think that eventually we'll hit the point where online voting is
starting to become a thing in places like West Virginia, right? And my only concern with, especially in the West Virginia system, is you're going to have, because they do it for overseas, you know, military personnel. And I think I live in Alameda County, I live in Dublin, and they do it also. I think that it's going to start becoming more common as a form of absentee voting. But again, it's just a matter of implementation and getting it right. And that's the thing that really frustrates me is you now have, under the status quo, you have a system where right now, if we're doing online voting, you could have 10 mysterious ballots cast from St. Petersburg, right? And that's the thing that really worries me. So you got to be careful with how it works out. But it's definitely possible. I know Estonia does it, right? They have online voting for their presidential race. So it could happen. I think it's just a matter of, you know, getting it right and making sure that we're implementing things properly. Yeah. Anything else?
All
right.
Thank you. I'm going to stop the
Sounds
recording.
good. Yeah.
I'll leave the share going for a little while.
Okay.
In case anybody has questions about